Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're diving into a homeowner's fight against their HOA that went all the way to court. But what happens when you finally get a second chance to argue your case, only to find out you're not allowed to argue about the one thing that actually matters? This story, it really pulls back the curtain on a critical and often misunderstood rule of the legal game.
Okay, just imagine this for a second. You're in court. You have fought for months, you've probably spent a ton of money, and you've finally gotten a second chance to make your case. But the moment you start explaining why the first decision was just plain wrong, the new judge stops you with this simple, almost casual question.
For homeowner Samantha Finch, that one question was basically the moment her entire appeal hit a brick wall. To figure out why her simply disagreeing wasn't enough, we have to rewind. We've got to go all the way back to the beginning to see how a single disputed fee snowballed into this years-long legal battle. So let's start in the middle of the story, on June 13th, 2025. This was supposed to be the big day for Samantha Finch, a real shot at vindication. But right from the get-go, the hearing just felt off. It felt totally disconnected from what her case was actually about. And this right here, this slide shows you the huge disconnect at the heart of the whole thing. On one side, you have Samantha Finch trying to argue the facts that the original judge just got it wrong. But on the other side, Judge Abramson is only focused on procedure. It's like they weren't even playing the same game. And the problem was, Finch had no idea. To really get why the judge was so laser-focused on procedure, we have to go back, way back to the beginning. Because this whole legal mess didn't start with some big dramatic event. It started with a small recurring fee that just spun completely out of control. It all comes down to this number, $45. For years, every single month, the Finches saw this charge pop up on their statement, and they were convinced it was an illegal penalty, way more than what the law allowed. The refusal to just pay it and move on, that's what kicked this whole thing off. So how in the world did the HOA justify a $45 fee when Arizona law clearly caps late fees at $15? Well, they got creative. They said, oh, only $15 of that is a late charge. The other $30, that's a collection cost, for the effort of sending you the notice. It's a really subtle difference in wording, but the entire case ended up hinging on it. And this is where you can see how that fee became a trap. One single missed payment back in April 2020 started this insane domino effect. So their May payment went to cover the April balance, which of course meant May was now late, triggering another $45 fee. The cycle just kept going. And get this, a crucial attempt to get ahead in November 2022 completely backfired, and it led to over 2 years where every single payment they made was technically late, racking up another and another and another $45 charge. So you're probably asking, okay, why couldn't they just catch up, right? Why was every single payment applied to the last month's balance? Well, here's the thing. It wasn't just the HOA's internal policy. It was literally the law. The law is this Arizona statute that creates what's called a payment waterfall. Think of it like this. Your payment has to fill a bunch of buckets, but in a very specific order. First, it has to cover any old unpaid principal. Once that's full, the money spills over to cover late charges. And only after all of that is taken care of can it even touch other costs, like that $30 notice fee. This is exactly why the Finches were trapped. Their regular monthly payment was always being eaten up by old debt before it ever had a chance to be applied to the current months. So, after that first big hearing, Judge Samuel Fox sided completely with the HOA on these two key points. He agreed that, yep, that $30 charge was a legit collection cost, not a late fee, and he found that the HOA had applied all the Finches' payments correctly according to that state-mandated waterfall. As far as the court was concerned, case closed. But for the Finches, it just felt deeply, deeply wrong. Obviously, the Finches didn't agree with the judge, so they filed for a rehearing. But this is where the story takes a really critical turn. It reveals how these very specific, sometimes unforgiving rules of the legal process can be way more important than the actual facts of the case. See, to get a rehearing, you have to state your specific reasons why. The Finches listed a few, and most of them basically boiled down to one simple argument. The judge just got it wrong. He misinterpreted the evidence and the law. But then they also included this one very different, very technical reason at the bottom, something about an error in how evidence was handled.
And boom, this is the moment everything changed. The Arizona Department of Real Estate looked at their request and basically said, okay, we will grant you a new hearing, but only on this one super narrow procedural issue. They threw out all the other arguments about the judge being wrong on the facts. So what does that actually mean, a procedural error? Well, it's not about the final outcome. It's about a mistake in how the trial was run. Think of it this way. It's like arguing that the referee in a football game used the wrong whistle, not that they made a bad call. The Finches were given a chance to prove the process was flawed, not a chance to re-argue that the final conclusion was wrong. And this brings us right back to that super frustrating day in court with Judge Abramson. And it finally solves the mystery of why simply disagreeing with that first decision just wasn't going to be enough to win. You see, Judge Abramson wasn't trying to be difficult or unfair. Her hands were legally tied by the very narrow scope of the rehearing. She was flat out prohibited from re-examining the evidence about the $45 fee or the payment waterfall. Her one and only job was to figure out if the first judge, Judge Fox, had made a procedural mistake, like wrongly throwing out a key piece of evidence. And the Finches, well, they just couldn't prove that he had. The final order from that rehearing just spells it out in black and white legalese. It says all the Finches' arguments about why the first decision was factually wrong were improperly raised. In other words, because they couldn't point to a specific mistake in the rulebook from the first hearing, their entire appeal was thrown out. Dismissed. This case is such a powerful lesson. It shows that in the world of law, your gut feeling that a decision is unjust is a completely different thing from being able to prove that a specific rule in the legal playbook was broken. One is an emotional, human response. The other is a cold, hard, technical, legal argument. For the Finches, learning this incredibly important rule came at the very end of a long, frustrating, and no doubt expensive battle. And it leaves all of us with a really critical question to think about. When you step onto the legal battlefield, are you just focused on winning the war? Or do you even know all the technical rules you have to follow just to stay in the game?